roundtable session. My name is Zita Eslazak from the Movement Strategy team. Crystal, could you please move to the next slide? Next slide, please. In this session, there are going to be two parts to it. A brief introduction to the Universal Code of Conduct and the Enforcement Draft Guideline Review, which is going to last for 15 minutes. And there's going to be a panel session after that, which is supposed to last for 45 minutes. On the panel, we have Crystal Stegenberg, sorry, please, Jeffrey Kiefer, Blossom Ozorumba, and Pascal Walter. And this session is being hosted by myself and Samuel Oyelele. Thank you so much once again for joining us. And we would now begin with a brief introduction to the Universal Code of Conduct. So, as I already mentioned, my name is Zita Erslazak from the Movement Strategy and Governance team at the Foundation. I'm currently based in Accra, Ghana, and I'll be moderating the first session of the Universal Code of Conduct presentation. So this is a brief introduction on how the UCOC came about. Before I begin to talk about the UCOC, I would like to pose this question to us all. Do you think enough has been done to ensure the safety and inclusion of all Wikimedia contributors? I would appreciate it if you would take a minute to ponder over this question. Feel free to type your comments in the chat, and yeah, you feel free to also share your feedback with us during the Q&A session. But about 4 years ago, the movement strategy process began, and that brought about conversations around what we hope the future of the Wikimedia community would be. And this led us to set a great vision for our community, which is to become an ecosystem, an essential infrastructure of the ecosystem of free knowledge, in which anyone who shares in this vision will be able to join us. Now, in order to attain this vision, we began by assessing ourselves as a community, and we realized that one important thing that we need to ensure is the safety and inclusion of all community members. Over the years, there has been several incidents of conflict arising in communities, volunteers abruptly dropping off from our project as a result of harassment, and certain officials or people with high authority abusing their power. So we began to ask questions around what we can do together to ensure that our diverse communities of contributors feel safe, belonged within their healthy communities. And this led us to the Universal Code of Conduct, which we popularly refer to as the UCOC. UCOC is a binding minimum set of expected and unacceptable behavioral standards across all Wikimedia projects and spaces. If you haven't been able to familiarize yourself with the UCOC yet, I will encourage you to do so. Malton, would you please share a link to the UCOC policy in the chat for our audience? Thank you. Next slide, please. There are two phases in the UCOC process. There was the first phase, which involved research and conversations with communities about existing local policies and the content of the UCOC. And the second phase, which is focused on research and conversations about enforcement, the enforcement draft guidelines, which was published for community review in the process that lasted for 2 months. Between September and October, the movement strategy and governance team organized conversations to to collect feedback from communities in Africa. And this included a Francophone Africa EDGAR session. And by EDGAR, I mean Enforcement Draft Guideline Review. And there was also the West Africa EDGAR session and the East and South Africa session. These conversations were well attended, but I think we could do better as an African community. And there has been reports about these conversations, which have been published on Meta. And you can still provide your feedback about the enforcement guideline review using this link, which will be provided on the resource page of the presentation. Next slide, please. The next stage in the UCLC process is the ratification of which Christa will be talking more about during the panel session. But while we wait for this stage and the enforcement guidelines to be updated based on the feedback which have been provided so far, you can familiarize yourself with the UCOC. You can also help translate the UCOC and enforcement guideline review. You can help design memes and infographics to help communicate the UCOC with your community. We also encourage you to continue having discussions about the UCOC with your community, because this is a cyclical process of re-evaluating ourselves as a community to see if the UCOC is being effective or there are things that we need to change to make it more effective. Next slide, please. So I will provide this presentation on Commons after this session. So you can have access to the links that are in the resource page. Next slide, please. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. But after this whole session, which is the panel session, will be available at table 4 in case you have any further questions. And yeah, I think I'll end here and hand it over to Samuel, who would be facilitating the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zita. Thank you for that brilliant and wonderful presentation. It was precise and talks a lot around the things that have happened until now with the UCOC process. Thank you. I believe a lot of people in this conference are familiar with what UCOC is already, because I mean, we've talked a lot about it, we've shared information about it. So even if you have not been very engaged, you probably have heard about it. So in case you've not been engaged, we hope that that brief presentation and outline presented by Zita has been very good in enlightening you on what we've been doing so far and this current stage of the process, of the UCOC process. So the next part of this session would be, of course, the panel session, which we have with me 4 other people that will be joining this conversation. So the first person on my panel is Christa Johnson, who is from the Wikimedia Foundation, and she'll be offering some perspectives from the Wikimedia Foundation regarding the UCOC process and what is being expected and the next steps in the process. We also have 3 members from the UCOC drafting committee, and they are Jeffrey Kifa, Blossom Uzurumba, and Pascal Walter. So I have some questions here that I'll be sharing with our panelists, and I would also be looking in the chat and taking questions from you guys as well. So if you have burning questions regarding the UCOC process or what this entails, please leave them in the chat and then we'll pick them up and try to ask the panelists that are present on this call. But first of all, before we even start elaborating on this process and what has been happening, I want to throw this question open, because I'm sure there are still some people who hear UCOC and are like, what's UCOC? What is it about? Why do we need it? I mean, people has these questions, believe it or not. So I would be putting Crystal on the spot first to tell us what UCOC is about and what is it about? Why do we even need it in the first place? What's the process like? Tell us, Crystal.
Well, I think Sita already explained a bit why we need it and where all this comes from. Wikimedians often are really wonderful people, and there's a lot of super positive interactions on our projects. But unfortunately, in an open environment, which the Wikimedia movement is, there will always also be bad actors and there will always also be some conflict. And as we are a global movement, people have very different ideas about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, how things should be done. So we thought that, and the community thought, that actually came up from the strategy conversations, that it would be good to have something like a minimal standard, something where everyone within the Wikiverse, I always call it the Wikiverse, the Wiki movement, can be sure if I hold to these guidelines, I can be confident that I'm not breaking any rules, even if I'm on a different project, that I can be confident that I'm keeping to the baseline, but that I also know if someone is treating me unfairly, I can check against these guidelines. Is it just me, perhaps, who is a bit too unsure, or if it is something that really is not tolerated in this global community?
Thank you very much, Crystal. That's a wonderful explanation on the entire point of the UCLC, which I think everyone who is listening to this conference would definitely agree with. I mean, like, we've all been to Wikipedia. Sometimes you feel it's important to know what is expected of us while we're on the project, and also to know that we are sort of safe from being attacked or being called on the project, and make sure that it's just important to have safe spaces for people. I'm going to be moving over now to a member of the drafting committee who is going to give an overview of what the drafting committee process is like. What is it like being on the UCLC drafting committee? I'll be calling on Jeffrey Kifa to tell us a bit, who would offer insight, because some of us, we know when it was announced that we need members on the drafting committee, and then now we saw the enforcement drive guidelines which they put out for us to review. So Jeff, what is it like being involved in the drafting committee?
Sure. Thank you for that question. Being on the drafting committee is really a wonderful process. It's wonderful because the people who are on the committee, it's a global committee. So there are people from all over the world who are on this committee, and they all bring different experiences and different beliefs about their experiences, as well as about the movement across our many languages and our many kinds of projects that we work on. However, we all have the same goal. And the same goal is to determine how can we enforce something which is global in scope, something we've never done before. How can we enforce that in a way that will be fair across all communities, all languages, all cultural groups? How can we do this? Because we've never tried it before. So in that sense, it's challenging because there's not an easy answer. If it were easy, we would have done it already. It's not an easy answer, but the group that's on the committee that I work with there, they're all passionate. Everybody is passionate. Everybody believes this is very much needed. This will help us as a global movement. However, it's not an easy process to get there because we're talking about these issues at times for the first time. So in that sense, I think that it's a wonderful opportunity for us to really work through this and try to make the movement a better place for all of the members who want to be a part of it.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. That's a very good way to look at it. I'll be asking a follow-up question on that, and I'll be passing it to Pascal to ask. Now we've talked about, we want to solve this problem with harassment. We want to make sure that people are safe. We want to make sure that there's a global guideline to ensure that the UCOC caters to that and ensure that there's a baseline behavioral standards that's expected from volunteers. So I'm going to be asking Pascal now, do you think the UCOC policy that's been created, this implementation plan, this policy, do you think it will actually totally solve harassment problems?
What I think is that any rule or any law cannot live without people reading it and rereading it all the time. It's not a dead document. We must interpret it, and we must appropriate ourselves these rules. So I think in each community we have to simply read the code, see if it does tell us something when we are reading the code, that we should not do vandalism, abuse of power, harassment, intolerance. Perhaps we could see at our local level, do we have problem of vandalism? Do we have problem of abuse of power, harassment, intolerance? How did we solve it since now? And was it a good way to solve it? And what can we do better?
Yes, thank you, Pascal. I'm going to try to get some WMF perspective on this. So I'm going to ask Crystal as well. Do you feel like the UCLC policy would directly actually solve harassment, in your own opinion?
I don't think nothing can solve such a big problem. It's a problem of humanity. It's a problem that happens in all spaces. But I do believe it can help us to make the Wikimedia platforms a better place than they are now. I think they already are a good place. I think we are a better place than some other corners of the internet. But we strive to be the best. And I think this really helps us get a few steps in place, bring us a bit more forward in the direction where we really want to be that inclusive place, that place where the global community can meet and interact and share knowledge freely, and not be afraid that someone will say something highly inappropriate or do something that makes me feel bad or makes me as a user feel very sad and will perhaps drive me off the platform. So don't believe everything will be solved, but I think we will come closer to the place we want to be.
Thank you, Christel. I think these points are very important to make. That, of course, we are being realistic. We don't expect that harassment will end overall, but it's important to still do something about it and ensure that we keep it at the very, very lowest level that it can possibly be. Thank you for that answer, Christel and Pascal. Now I want to go back to the drafting committee process again, and I'll be asking Jeffrey. No, sorry, I'll be going to Blossom this time. On what the challenges that you feel you encountered while creating this enforcement draft. Are there particular challenges that you think should be noted that we should know about in trying to create this draft for us all?
Okay, thank you very much. I would want to first of all thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. It's actually a very interesting one. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we had a lot of challenges. I would want to first of all name check Christelle and Sally. They just brought, and the members of the Wikimedia Foundation, they just brought this ease, if I can use that word, to the entire flow. At each time, people knew what was expected of them. And even when you're not able to be part of the actual processes, they also provided that sort of pathway for you to be able to communicate ahead of time. And on the process side, I probably would want to look at things that we can control, things like time differences for the drafting committee members to meet together at specific time, which they've also tried to resolve by having office hours, which over time has then been changed to actual work time. People can drop in at those time and then do the things or catch up on things that they weren't able to do at the point everybody was supposed to meet up. So I would want to think that they were very proactive and they sort of envisaged some of the challenges that would be faced, especially in people meeting together. But in the actual content of the draft itself, I would not think there was much of a challenge, because basically what we're trying to do is not just to come up with a one size fits all or a fit for purpose thing. At the point, the drafting committee members, just like Jeffrey had earlier pointed out, made up of people from everywhere. So everybody had different opinions, everybody had different thoughts or different perspectives to issues. But for somehow we're able to make every voice count and make sure that it was representative of everybody within there. So fair enough, they were able to bring people from everywhere. So at the end of the day, what comes out will be something that can truly be said to represent every voice. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blossom, for that. Uh, and thank you for shouting out to Crystal and Sally. I mean, Crystal and Sally have been very awesome in the process, the drafting process of the UCLC enforcement draft guidelines. Some people here might not know, but yeah, they are the main drive behind, making sure that we come up with the very great content that we have that to review. I would rephrase that question again and direct it to Jeffrey, because Blossom mentioned something around developing a one size fits all policy, that it's not that straightforward. So I want to ask you, Jeffrey, how challenging was it? How difficult was it to have this draft that we have that is supposed to work for a very diverse movement like ours? I mean, we are all over the world, and we're supposed to have this draft, this enforcement draft for behaviors, which is supposed to affect everyone from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world. How difficult and how challenging do you think that is for the community?
Really challenging. we're we're still working on the draft about how this is going to work so that we could share it back with the movement. And this is challenging, to be clear, not because the group that's working on this, the committee, doesn't like each other. We do. It's not because we don't believe that this is necessary. We all believe it's necessary. We all believe that the movement really needs this to help to keep us all safe and to have some sort of a structure and a process. The challenge is that across the movement, the 323 languages that we have on Wikipedia alone, not to mention all of the affiliates, all of the projects, all of the formal projects, the informal projects, online, offline related to the projects. How do we have some sort of enforcement that is fair and globally fair and applies to all of us? How do we do that? And that is really the challenge. Some parts of the movement are already very, very structured. Some parts of the movement are less structured. So how do we implement something where it'll be fair and just and somehow applicable to those various extremes in the movement? Great structure, less structure, or developing structure. How do we do that without being top-down forcing on us, which nobody wants? Because in the same way that our movement has come about in an organic fashion, it's because people are bold and do something that they see that needs to be done. How could we take that same energy and help to enforce this so that we're all safe to be part of this movement and safe to contribute?
Thank you, Jeffrey, for that. It's interesting to know because, yeah, this is supposed to work for everyone. It's expected that it would definitely be very challenging to have something that would work for everyone, especially knowing how diverse this is. I would be passing this a related question again to Pascal to ask, of all the challenges that Jeffrey has highlighted, which do you think was the most difficult one to solve? If you had to pick one, yeah.
It's the most difficult to solve is that there are very different sizes of groups, as Jeffrey said, and for the small groups, we must find a good solution that everybody can be included in that movement of a UCLC application without that we get overwhelmed but too complicated processes. So the processes must be effective, and it must not be an overload for people who have to deal with it. And there is also one thing, it has to be coherent with the rest of our rules or expectation, general rules. There must not be a contradiction. That's something we also have to check.
Thank you, Pascal, for that. I'll be moving over now to Christel again from the foundation. And I want to ask this question because during our consultation with African communities, we've had this question come up quite frequently. People are like, why is the UCOC taking this long to get finished? Why is it not implemented yet? I mean, some people are like, we started this a year ago. Why are we here? Why is it so difficult to have a code of conduct? I mean, it's just UCOC, right? So I want you to talk about that. How difficult was it, or to how's the timeline like? Why did it take so long? What was the reason why it's taking this long? And are there set timelines to when we're actually going to get this fully implemented within the Wikimedia project? Just, yeah, generally tell us about the timelines.
Well, I think you know that we are all Wikimedians and we are a volunteer-driven movement. We are not a top-down organization where the foundation, the people that sit in San Francisco or somewhere else can dictate for the rest of the world. These are the rules. But that just takes time to listen to volunteers. And we decided that the board of trustees decided to split the process up into two parts. So we actually did a good part already, the Universal Code of Conduct, the guidelines on how should you behave, what should you not do. They have been crafted by a first committee, which worked very efficiently, and still we had a timeline and we expanded it a bit. I think a lot of people who have worked on Wikimedia projects have seen this. We try, but also we're trying something totally new. We do that so often, we don't get aware of that. We are trying something that has not been done anywhere in the world, to create basically something like, it's not a law, but a rule that will apply to people all across the world. And that is not just dictated by, as I said, some person in a headquarter in some big city, be it Nairobi, be it San Francisco, be it Tokyo, that doesn't matter, but that's how it usually happens. But we really want it created by all the people who are affected by it, at least for all of them to have a voice in that. And that just takes time. So we did the first part, we finished that. We took some time to rest, recharge, get more people into the process, do more consultations, learn more. And then we started with the second phase of implementation, where we think about, yes, we have those guidelines of be civil, be collegial, but what does it mean? What will we do if a person doesn't follow those rules? What do we mean by not collegial? And who can tell someone, hey, you have to be a bit more collegial? Can we do this? Or should it be something totally different? So that's the phase where we are in now. It's much more complex than the first idea, because knowing what is right and what is wrong, it's not that easy, but people have an easier time grasping this than what can we do about someone who doesn't align with the rules. So we hope to have, the committee already did awesome work by bringing in the first draft, and community reviewed it. I think that's also super important. We took more time, we gave communities more time to look at the draft and to give their feedback that now is being incorporated by the committee. And we got so much feedback that, yes, we need more time. Again, we extended our original timeline a little bit, but we hope to be ready with the review of the draft, with the reworking of the draft before Christmas.
Thank you very much, Christel, for that very elaborate conversation. That very elaborate answers. Sorry. Like you said, thank you for pointing it out that we are trying to give communities enough time to review the document and make sure that we come up with something near perfect, even if not perfect, because I feel like it's important to make sure that we are very detailed in how we go about the process rather than to rush it and then we come up with something very problematic. So it's good to have that. So yeah, in my opinion, I would say it's good that we're taking our time. So even if people want to probably want this done and over with, I feel like the steps that we're taking this time is very, very good because our enforcement draft guideline review, for example, took 2 months, which gave communities enough time to actually look at those documents and give their comments and give their feedback. Uh, in comparison to just having it for like a month or few weeks. Um, so yeah, it's a good way to have our consultations to be as rich as it possibly can. Before I move on to the next question, I want to also highlight here that you can also ask questions. You that you are watching this, we have a lot of people that are watching this right now. You can drop your comments in the chat box. I would see it and I can also present it to either Crystal or the drafting committee members. So we are expecting you to do that. I would move on to the next question now. And that would also be directed to Jeffrey this time. And Crystal can also have a word on it if she asks something about the question. And it's the fact that the UCOC is currently being presented as a baseline policies. As a baseline policy to guide the acceptable behaviors on Wikimedia projects. So how important do you think it is for individual communities, individual projects, individual events to also further build on this policy? Do you think it's important for them to do that, for them to have additional policies to sort of make it more robust rather than just a baseline policy? Or do you think the policy that would be come up with, that we are going to come up with eventually, the policy that we already have and the implementation that we're going to come up with, do you think it's going to be very sufficient to guide behaviors and prevent harassment across Wikimedia projects?
Well, and your question is exactly why this is taking so long. And while Christa was responding to the amount of time that it was taking, I was writing down, we have the movement charter process, which was brand new, and all of that everything that was involved in that. We had the process with the board election, once again, entirely different process with movement strategy going on. We have the new CEO, the new leadership. There's so much that's happening. And how do we keep people safe, even discussing these things across all of these languages with all of these different norms of behavior? And in that way, the Universal Code of Conduct is set. That's already done. Our challenge now is how do we enforce it? Because we can't have a minimum set of guidelines that we don't enforce. Then we might as well not even have them. So how do we really enforce that in a way that we focus only on the baseline? Because we don't want to speak to everything people should not do. That will not really help. We need to have that baseline so that we could then point back to it and say, well, somebody doesn't seem to be following this in how they're speaking to me or how they're treating me or what they're saying on this list or something like that. And all of that takes time. And I think that it's definitely needed as a baseline. I don't think that we need to get terribly much more information on that, but more about how do we deal with that for somebody who does face abuse or is bullied, or there is something in the comments, perhaps there's a challenge with whatever the leadership might be within that community. Where do we go? What do we point to and say that this doesn't seem to be consistent with this baseline policy?
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I'm going to also direct the question again to Blossom as well, because she's a member of the Igbo Wikipedia community, which is one of the emerging Wikipedia languages on the Wikimedia movement, and I feel like she would also bring some perspectives regarding how the UCOC should be adopted. So I reckon that currently, unlike the English Wikipedia or some of the other bigger projects, the Igbo Wikipedia, for instance, doesn't currently have like an actual robust guideline that guides behavior. So how important do you think this UCOC would be for the language Wikipedia? And do you feel it will be sufficient to handle the behaviors that are going on there, or do you think even going forward, the Igbo Wikipedia or any other of the small language Wikipedia would need to like develop it further?
All right. Thank you very much, Sam. That's actually a very interesting twist to to the question, in the sense that we might try to do all we can, for the established languages, but then it's always very important to understand that some other languages that are not as regulated, if I can use that word, even though it's not a very fitting word to use in this context, might probably have different ways or different approaches to how they are able to adopt the general or the whole. So what that means is, I personally, this is my opinion. Might want to suggest that different language groups, different platforms might probably be allowed to try to domesticate theirs in line with their actual realities or in line with the things that work for them or matter to them. But then there should be a base, there should be a baseline that should govern everybody, regardless of whether you're established or you're still developing or stuff like that.
Thank you very much, Blossom, for that. Yeah, uh, indeed, it's true. Eventually, some communities will definitely develop the UCOC further than it is. But yeah, this is a baseline which we definitely won't be reducing. People would definitely have to obey what is this baseline, and then they can add on to it on other behavioral guidelines and other behavioral policies. Um, Now, I think I would direct this to all the drafting committee members, but I would start with Jeffrey. But before I go on to that, I want to ask Christelle if she has anything to say, considering my last questions regarding the baseline policy and the need to probably build on that further.
I think the drafting committee members already said all of the really important things. It is a baseline, and it's super good and interesting if communities adapt it, if communities want to build on it. And as Blossom pointed out, this will be very different for really large communities who already have built certain systems of governance, I would call it. And for communities that rely on, we know each other. We started out as 10, 15 friends, perhaps we are now 50, 60 people, but we still have that feeling of we can just talk to each other. We don't need bureaucracy. But again, we hope that those communities will also grow more. And once they have reached the 200, 400,000 editor margin, they might be really happy that they built onto the code of conduct now.
Thank you very much for that, Crystal. So my next question to the drafting committee members, like I said, would be, yeah, the drafting committee is coming together again to start their regular meetings, to start looking at how to further improve the enforcement draft that they've come up with. So what is the next phase of your workflow going to look like? We want to know, now that you're resuming work on the draft and the implementation phase of the process, what do you think the phase is going to look like for the committee? And Jeffrey, do you want to go first?
Sure. Of course, I could only speculate because I don't know how the discussions will continue. And I'm mentioning that in part because, just so people know, the drafting committee meets every week for 2 hours a week. These are volunteers. So there's an enormous commitment there, because also these are very challenging issues. So one issue that is really trying to be understood and figured out is, what will this enforcement committee group process, What's it going to look like? Is it another committee? Is it another level? Or will this be a group that will be similar to some of the other leadership structures across projects? Is this a group that's above that? Is this a group that enforces things or makes recommendations? How do we appeal to this group? Do we appeal to the group? How does this work on large projects versus smaller and developing projects? These are those issues that we're really trying to make some progress on. And one last comment I'll make here, I've been involved in many discussions across the movement on many different projects and processes. And what really impresses me about working with my colleagues on this committee is that people actually listen to each other when there's some sort of disagreement. If somebody says something that might be different from what somebody else thinks, we listen. And in that way, I think we're trying to model some of the behavior that we're hoping the Universal Code of Conduct will promote amongst our members who come from different perspectives.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I would also direct the same question to Walter and ask, add a bit of a caveat to it. What is going to happen to all of the reviews that have been collected? There's so many of them from different parts of the movement, from different parts of the world. What will be happening to all of this feedback? How does the drafting committee intend to how do you intend to bring that into the existing draft and use it to improve it? Pascal.
So there were a lot of feedback, and be sure that everything has been read by people. So there are several processes of reading feedback. We were reading feedback whilst they were be put online. The WMF, the team who is helping us, is reading everything and making a sort of digest to group similar proposition. And of course, we match them with our own discussions. And it's really taken in account. It's not something which has been done for nothing. Be sure of that. And as Jeffrey explained, there are live conversation. We make asynchronous comments in the document. And so we check if everything is coherent. This is what I thought before. And the WMF helps to frame all this discussion so that nothing has been forgotten. Everything is good aligned. And I think a draft is a written document that we will provide. So it's not something like just speaking or talking. So it must be precise because this document will stay. But it's really a very, very good work with all the teams, the input from the community, the WMF, and the drafting committee. I guarantee you the quality.
Thank you very much, Pascal. So going forward, it will be important to make the document more concise and try to solve some of the issues that has been highlighted in the current version of the draft. Good luck with that. I mean, what you guys do is great work, as it's been highlighted by Christa in the chat, and wishing you luck in trying to refine the draft even further to serve the community better. I'm going to ask the question to Blossom again, but again, I want to add something else to the question, which is, how do you think the African community can participate? So going forward in your workflow in the drafting committee, how do you feel, what are the best ways that you feel people from Africa, people from emerging communities can get their voice heard? Because sometimes some people on this meeting currently will feel like, oh, the process is far gone, I might not be able to add anything to it. I mean, the policy is there now, the first draft of the enforcement draft is there now. What else can I add to it? So how do you think the African community can participate? And I'll also direct a question to Christelle as well, from what the foundation might need from the community going forward. But yeah, Blossom.
Okay, thank you once more. So I would want to believe that there would always be room for improvement. No workable policy sets like that is complete if it does not give room for continuous reiteration and improvement and all that. And that would mean that there would be room for a lot of feedback process whereby people can suggest ways to make it better or to make it more fit into their own specific communities. So, what that would mean is before we even get to how people can give feedbacks and all that, people need to know that this exists. So, post ratification by the board, I think that should happen at the end of December 2021. It will be very important to create lots of awareness for the UCOC so people can effectively embrace it either in their individual spaces or probably in their spaces as a community. So, like I earlier said, it's one thing to have a universal code of conduct, and it is another thing for the community to know that it exists, and then for the community to also embrace it and commit to those guidelines as well. So I believe the most pressing thing at this time for us, especially within the African continent, is to learn as much as we can about the UCOC, and if possible, yes, we had the town hall sessions and stuff like that, conversation sessions where every voice from outside of the drafting committee itself, counted, and then all the suggestions were brought to the committee to try and refine and review and make it more adoptable. It's still not late for people to go through all the resources available to learn as much as they can and probably pitch in one or two things at this point. But that being said, there has to be room for continuous improvement going forward.
Thank you, Blossom. We have few minutes to go now. So since you mentioned ratification, I will be bringing that to Christel. Tell us about ratification and how the African community can participate in this process, or even tell us what it's about, if you can.
So for the first part, the UCOC was just approved. Ratification is another word for it. Approved, ratified by the Board of Trustees. We heard that some volunteers were not happy with that. They felt that the community needs to have a voice in approving, ratifying such a code. And so for the second phase, we are thinking about a way. How can communities be included in this process? How can community get their voice heard? And we are not fully sure how this will be done. The board also has a voice. They have to decide. They actually have the right to say, we just approve it. We don't listen to the communities, but they are talking with us and they're also willing to listen to communities. What we would like really to know is, in all those processes that have been going on in recent years, where do you think we could have done better in listening to the African voices? What could we have done differently so that your voices on the continent were heard? Do you have any ideas how we could improve those processes? During the movement-wide elections, during the strategy process, what was lacking? What could have been done better? And let us know. And also, there will be some way where we will collect your voices. So keep your eyes open. Keep connected to the people like Sam, Sita, Mahouton, those people who are strategy MSG, how would I say, facilitators, the people who talk to the African communities, and they will have the information. They are the people to ask, but they are also the people to tell what we should do and how we could listen better to your voices.
Thank you very much, Christel. There you have it. The ratification process is still being designed, so we welcome your thoughts on it. We also welcome your thoughts on other processes of the UCOC as well, including those that have been concluded. So that's why we have a booth in the Wiki Indaba conference. So you can head over to our booth in the community section of this conference and just join our table. Someone is always there starting from tomorrow. Someone on the from the WMF is always there to from the MSG team is always there to sit there and just try to take your question, to try to discuss with you your thoughts and some of the feedback that you have, especially on ratification, which is the next phase of the process. And we can share these thoughts with the UCOC project team as well as the drafting committee, and they can use some of those feedback in designing the next phase of the process. So after this session, we have speed networking. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Before we round up, I'm going to round this. Before we go, I'm going to round this up with thoughts from the panelists on where they think the UCOC is headed in the next few years. We probably would not be able to go around, so let me just start with Jeffrey, and then we'll see who else can go before 12:55. Yeah.
Sure. So where is this headed? I think that this is an opportunity for us to have more involvement with the community, helping to monitor and to support members of our own communities. So I believe that this is an opportunity for us to further globalize a democratic and ongoing engagement with people across our movement.
Thank you. Pascal, do you want to comment as well? Which position do you think the UCOC would be in the next few years, Pascal?
The digital world is new. It's only 20 years old, or less or more. And there was a new violence in the digital spaces, which was unexpected. So much harassment is something strange. And so it's a heavy tendency everywhere in the world for all platforms to have code of conduct. So it's normal that our big movement, we are one of the biggest platform in the world, has code too. It's necessary for the digital world to regulate the violence. So I think the code will last for a long time, and it will be a general tendency of all the platforms. What is interesting is that here we have built the code in the way we are working together, which is not a vertical one, but a community-led one. And this is very original and is a great thing for our movement, a great opportunity.
Thank you very much, Pascal. So we are at the end of the session now. Thank you so much to the panelists for joining this session, and thank you very much to the attendees of this session as well. We hope to see you on our booth so that we can discuss further on this and get your opinion on several parts of the process. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
as we still seem to be on. I'm going to also just thank everyone for being part of this conversation. And I really want to encourage you again to just talk about the Universal Code of Conduct. That's to the last question, actually, of Sam. What I think where I see this code of conduct going is that we will talk amongst each other as a community a lot more about what behavior is appropriate. How can we stop behavior that is not appropriate? And I do believe that the way we are doing it, as I said, it's something that hasn't been done before. It's something historic. I think that at one time people will look at this code of conduct and say, hey, this was that first example where a global community created something like this. And so I'm super happy to be part of this process. And I want to invite you to be part of this historic process and to really think about what footprint do you want to leave? What do you want to bring to this amazing, wonderful step forward towards an inclusive community where everyone can share in the sum of all knowledge?
Thank you very much, Christa.
Uh, both in language and the African context as well. So I see here we have something coming in from a student, Douglas Sabaglia. And what we can do is we have some questions that may be coming in throughout this time, but it'd be wonderful to be able to get you to connect with us towards the end of the program, where we'll be able to talk about your queries. Okay, so let me switch momentarily. And what we're going to be doing is hearing from Daquan Lawrence. Daquan, if you could talk a little bit about your organization, Smooth, and what you hope to achieve with Smooth, and connecting with groups like AfriCrowd, who focus on information on Wiki.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, everyone, for this platform. I'm very excited to be here. SMOOTH is actually an acronym. It is short for Strong Men Overcoming Obstacles Through Hard Work. We were started in Baltimore, Maryland in 2009. And last week, we celebrated our 12th year in existence. We are a community service-based mentoring organization. For those of you who are aware, public policies are very important in the world. Here in the United States, African descendants who are males receive a lot of unjust and undue persecution from many forms of the state, government, and other areas of life. As a mentor organization, we seek to allow young men to work together to create opportunities to help themselves and their community. We are a young, very young organization. The eldest member, I believe, is about 39 years of age. We are based at 3 colleges, 2 historically Black colleges in the United States, Morgan State, my first university that I attended, and also Coppin State, which is also in Baltimore and Maryland, as well as Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And again, what we do is work with different young men from all walks of life to help each other, get them to build and collaborate. In this vein, we're trying to collaborate with individuals from the diaspora, and also particularly young men and older men and women, of course, on the continent. As an all-male organization, we partner with female organizations. We partner with any organization to do whatever it is that helps people who look like us. And again, in this context, me being somebody who's a current graduate student at Howard University, who's very interested in serving the diaspora, I believe that this is the perfect platform to introduce our membership and organization to the international community, particularly the African community, to let them know that this is a young organization that's very interested in helping every member of the diaspora.
Thank you very much. And so during this event, we want to connect with you in the audience as well. We'd like to get an idea of what you feel can be done together, not only in this coming event, but as we continue throughout the year. beyond December 10th, we're going to be looking at more opportunities to connect into what is called Black History Month in the United States. And we also have other opportunities to connect on editing in different languages called translate-a-thons. So what we want to do right now is get a perspective on not only what we can talk about in African culture and African history, but also we would love to hear from you in the audience about some of the areas that you feel are important in African history and African knowledge that perhaps we can work on together in this partnership. I'm going to switch gears momentarily and going to introduce to you Dr. Christa Johnson. Dr. Christa Johnson is an associate professor and director of the Center for African Studies at Howard University. She is also the co-convener of the HU Women and Gender Studies Collective. She received her PhD in political science from Northwestern University and has published on a wide range of topics, including health policy, gender and HIV prevention, global health governance in Africa, and race and racism in international relations. She has lived and traveled extensively throughout Southern Africa, completed a Fulbright Fellowship in 2012 at the Center for the Study of HIV and AIDS. And in 2019, she was awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship to conduct research for her upcoming book on the Howard School, and early African American scholar and is an early African American scholar in the field of international relations. She recently completed a fellowship with the Drescher Center for Humanities at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. For 2021, she was also awarded a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship for 2021 in partnership with the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Christa Johnson, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ms. Antoine. Very nice to be here. I'm really excited to be participating in this really important and I hope really the beginning of many collaborations that Howard and really even the broader HBCU community can have around these issues of not just knowledge, production and generation and dissemination, but really also reclaiming an archive of lost and erased knowledge that needs to be reclaimed and repositioned in the kind of our kind of historical archive of humanity. So as Sherry mentioned, I am a professor at Howard University, and I am assuming perhaps many of the audience members aren't so familiar with Howard University if you're joining us from the African continent. So Howard University was founded in 1867. It is what Sherry mentioned is an HBCU, a historically Black college and university. And it was established at the end of the Civil War in the United States, with several other institutions which have had similar mandates at that particular time. Howard University has always been, I think, unique in some respects in that it's based here in the nation's capital. It has always had a mandate and an agenda to educate underrepresented minority Black populations, starting with the African American community. But to be honest, from its inception, it has had a diverse student body. It was always co-ed, actually, which was unique at the time of its founding. So it has some interesting and unique kind of history that makes it an important institution in terms of the conversations that we're having now. So I am also a professor in the Department of African Studies. And again, I just want to highlight a little bit of the history of the department. The department was founded in 1954, making it really one of the youngest departments of African Studies in the United States. And the faculty at Howard founded the Department of African Studies long before, decades before, in fact, African American studies became kind of in vogue. And then we now also have a Department of African American Studies, but that was only founded in 1968. And I want to just also highlight that actually the faculty at Howard, as early as the 1920s, was actually pushing for a department or an institute of African studies under the leadership of faculty like Professor Alain Locke. The Board of Trustees was certainly asked, and they at that time didn't really see the need, right, to have why do we need to study Africa? But it was in fact the faculty at Howard University who were really in the forefront of making the argument that this is not only an important region of the world, but has had kind of central significance to many processes of modernity and human development and civilization that are important to study and to learn and to know about, and then to be able to disseminate that knowledge and to have alternative bases of knowledge. I also am director of our Center for African Studies, and the Center for African Studies is a Title VI funded, Department of Education funded national resource center. What's significant there is Howard has had this grant for going on 8 years now, and we're the only HBCU, in fact, in the United States that is demarcated as a national resource center for African studies, which is unfortunate because I think we need to have more, kind of centers like this at other HBCUs. But it again, I think puts Howard in a unique position, but also I think in a position of which requires leadership and further engagement around these issues, because we have been, of course, privileged to be awarded this National Resource Center. I'm going to keep my remarks somewhat brief. I'm going to try and be brief, but I just did want to kind of again.
No, please continue.
Okay, I'll give a bit of a highlight of, I want to kind of, I guess, make the argument or make the case that HBCUs and Howard in particular should be seen and understood as a site of decolonial knowledge production, right? I think it's important to recognize and to understand that historically, Black intellectuals have created and have sought to create Black counter public spheres. And that's very much the kind of ethos in which faculty working in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, up through the contemporary era, understands their mandate and their mission really as they teach and conduct research on HBCU campuses. So everyone, of course, is familiar. I mean, when I'm talking about Black intellectuals, of course, going back historically, we're talking about figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, Charles Johnson, Alain Locke, Ralph Bunche, E. Franklin Frazier, Rayford Logan. The list goes on and on. Those are even just mainly the ones who were here at Howard, let alone, other campuses. And I think really what you saw was in the 1920s and through 1940s, in the kind of interwar and World War II era, this was the era of segregation and Jim Crow segregation in the United States. So you had Black scholars who came to Howard because, in fact, they had they were not allowed to teach or to conduct research at the white institutions. So the system of segregation kind of pooled all of the Black excellence here on campuses like Howard University. But also, it's important to note that the knowledge, and they were prolific in their knowledge production and generation. But significantly, of course, at that time, the journals and the sites or the outlets of publications and whatnot were also segregated, right? And so it's not that these scholars certainly were working under conditions which didn't allow them to be necessarily as productive, but oftentimes they were. It's interesting. Alden Morris, who is one of the experts on W.E.B. Du Bois, was commenting recently, actually, that Du Bois published or produced something like 17,000 pieces of scholarly work. That's outrageous. But it just shows the kind of the level of production. But of course, what is known about Du Bois tends to be the ones, some of his most famous work, but also oftentimes the ones which were published in white journals, which were ended up being published in white journals. But in addition to that era, you have the civil rights era, where again, HBCUs played a formative role in the intellectual activities of the civil rights movement, but also linking that to the activist movements of those generations as well, and really helping society and the world interpret and understand what were the issues surrounding the civil rights era. And then, of course, today we have the contemporary era with the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, I think you're seeing HBCUs, African American faculty, again, at the forefront, having to interpret and having to provide context and understanding for the contemporary grievances that communities of color in the United States and throughout the world really are confronting. So,
Yeah, and
yes.
I just wanted to touch on that because we saw that, more than ever, we're more connected than we've ever been before. So, we may be separated by the by continents, but the diaspora, especially with our communal global history that we've seen this past year, for example, with everything that's happened, for example, in 2020, we saw that this was a response that happened all over the world and also in Africa and on the continent. It's I think 2 years ago we connected with Wiki Indaba, which was led by Wiki Nigeria at the time, Community Nigeria, and we created a document saying, we have a friendship and a familiarity. We are family, and and there's a lot that connects us that goes beyond, just history from 400 years ago. It's a continual history. It's a continual effect that we continue to see. So one thing that I think is great about this connection is that we can also work together to continue to develop that connection, but also in the Wiki community to be able to work together to continue to improve on the information that's available on our communities as well. I see we also have some more folks coming in from Smooth and Morgan State and elsewhere. I didn't want to cut you off, Dr. Johnson. I just wanted to touch on that point momentarily, and if you could please finish your thought. It was fantastic.
Well, sure. Let me I'll just make 2 quick points. So with regards to, I think where we are today and Afro Crowd and this Wiki Indaba and whatnot, I think it's important to kind of to state or to understand and appreciate that our objective or goal here shouldn't simply be about representation in these forums, in these digital and online forms of knowledge dissemination, but really we need to think, I think, more seriously about understanding this as really a decolonial project, right? And historically, yes, I think that's very much in line with what our forefathers and faculty, certainly on HBCU campuses, were thinking before. They were very much engaged in sustained efforts to create insurgent and resilient forms of thought. So it's not simply representation in these spaces, but things like, for example, demythologizing history, demythologizing whiteness, and demythologizing Western modernity. I can expand on what I mean by this if people are not familiar kind of with these terms, but that's very much the projects in which faculty on Howard's campus were engaged. Also, a part of this kind of decolonial project is also about destabilizing and deconstructing hegemonic notions of modernity and the West. And again, we can give some examples of how this, what this may look like, how this looked like in the past, but also what this may look like in the contemporary context. And then thirdly, part of this project would be decolonizing and democratizing knowledge production, right? So emphasize, and here again, I can give examples from the past, but also talk about what this might look like in a contemporary context.
You mentioned,
yes.
You mentioned also the faculty, and I'm just so excited that not only do we get to hear from you, but also from Dr. Minyandu, who can talk a little bit more into what you just mentioned about this expansion of knowledge and information, especially on African culture and language as well, and then the many different aspects of decolonializing not only that perspective, but also information as well, through working in different language areas. Dr. Johnson, thank you so very much. I'm so glad that you'll be able to stay with us for the remainder of the session, and we'll be able to hopefully touch on some of the things that you mentioned as well. So before we, thank you so very much. It's so great to have you. So now I'm going to introduce you to an amazing mind at Howard University, Dr. Thiwothle Minyandu. He's the lecturer of African Studies and World Languages and Cultures at Howard University. He's the 2018 Outstanding Full-Time Lecturer Award college recipient at Howard, with an expertise not only in world languages, but also academic diplomacy, Zulu language and global development, as well as African languages and technology. I'd love to go more into it, but I wanted to make sure that we hear from you, Dr. Minyandu. So if you could please just let us know about your work. And yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, most of my work, everyone, thank you, Dr. Johnson, and everyone at Howard. Actually, it's quite a supportive environment. Why is this important? It's because the idea of languages, we've always thought of languages as repositories of culture, how people think about culture and so on and so forth. But rarely do we think about languages as kind of economic domains. In other words, things that can help us make money for the students who are here, whatever business you are in. If you are majoring in technology, if you're a computer science student, guess what? African languages can help you actually get paid by collaboration. And this is why these cross-diasporic collaborations are important. So I look in my research actually into, it's guided by not language, but by culture, one aspect of culture. And that aspect is African clothes. Many of you today, I'm sorry, it may come as a surprise, it may even be depressing, but if you go ahead and if you are sitting here and you'd like to wear African clothes, well, guess what? These are them. They look nice, very good styles, but guess what? They come from China, okay? All of them. So most likely next time you see someone not wearing nice, very fancy, westernized type designed clothes, they come from China. What did the Chinese people do? Well, in Yiwu, in Zhejiang province, they did machine learning on African patterns, culture and modernity. And what did they do with that? They're now exporting them to Africa and throughout the world. So when you go to your mall and you buy some of these clothes, they'll come from China. What does this have to do with languages? Well, languages are unexplored yet, but it's the same way then that we have challenges with African clothes that kind of now Africans are struggling to kind of find design their own way, their own designs. The languages present us a possible solution. Why? Because if we take the languages out of kind of this dark secondary status in Africa and in the diaspora, we can actually make a lot of economic growth and we can collaborate for economic reasons. What do I mean by taking languages out of kind of this second-class citizenship that they exist in? Two examples of this, because I like challenging in my research, challenging us, people in the diaspora, Africans, and so that we can find solutions by being challenged. One is for example, what we call Jamaican patois. In 2011, they came up with the idea of Jamaican patois in the Bible. Well, guess what? Many educated people in Jamaica rejected this because they said, well, it doesn't sound like English. But actually, there's an opportunity here. if the Jamaicans would have actually embraced the leaders, embraced Patois, which is spoken by over 50% of the Jamaicans as a first language, and the economy sized it, the term I use, they would actually grow a lot. But for them to do this as wiki community, for example, in these platforms, we must be able to kind of think outside the box. Things that we usually thought they were kind of second class, we must bring them up in status, and we must collaborate around these fields. So someone sitting at Morgan State who's a student who says, I don't speak Patois, but well, you know someone who does, and you can actually make an app on Patois, a text to voice app. That's a type of wiki community collaboration that I'm interested in. A second one, the challenge in Kenya. Hakuna Matata, I'm sorry to disappoint many of you, that you cannot write this in a media a platform and not be sued by Disney. Well, why? Because in 1994, Disney actually copyrighted this this phrase. Well, a question that always comes from my students is, why did the Kenyans let them do it, or Tanzania, or Africans? You know, you could never like copyright Komsi Komsa. The French government wouldn't let you. So we have a challenge here. It's a challenge that Africans are actually asleep when it comes to the potential for their languages and how these languages can, through collaboration, which is why these platforms are important, actually lead to people living better lives and having agency. Well, my last slide is just solutions. We like solutions. So Africans I look into the idea of Africans first and people in the diaspora. I've mentioned Patois included, so the Caribbean, Africa, we must believe in these languages, right? So the Jamaicans must believe that Patois is actually make them money. A Patois is something that a robot can be taught Patois and it can speak to people. We must demystify them. So we must bring them out into the open. At Howard University, we, as the HBCU that teaches the most number of African languages, we've actually done this. Since 2015, an average of 40 students come and learn Zulu consistently, and we send them to South Africa. So these students come back, these American students from the Caribbean, are able then to think outside the box about language, see themselves in the language, even though they may not speak it perfectly, but it gives them ideas on collaboration. Lastly, make it sexy. Like, make the languages, in other words, put them in apps, put them in nice, and sexy here, I'm using the third description of sexy. It's an adjective. It means appealing and exciting. So that's what I'm interested in. And also some trends then, if I would quickly leave you with this, we can actually overcome this gap, because sometimes, whether in Jamaican Patois or in Africa as well, there's a big gap between reading and writing and speaking the language. So there's an opportunity here for the enterprising students among us, or there's an opportunity for collaboration. Text, we who can write to voice, so that we put this in systems that can then speak to people, and the people are able to interact through voice. That bridges the gap. So a person doesn't need to be literate in order to engage with technology and African languages. So, but to do this, we need to collaborate across disciplines. So in African studies, Professor Johnson, myself at Howard, would be always willing to collaborate then with people who are into computers, people who are in other disciplines across the diaspora. And we must have then collaboration across the diaspora. Someone in Uganda, in Kampala, should be able then to think, well, what's my language and what would I like to do with it? Well, I don't have to recreate the wheel. There are people at Howard, they can actually help me with my language. And so maybe I should connect with them, and I should actually help myself and my people. Why? Because we cannot keep blaming the Chinese, for example, as sometimes we do with the African print, because they'll keep doing what they're doing, and they're doing it for themselves. So the Africans, and through collaboration, were able then to take our future in our hands through thinking outside the box about basic things as languages. So they're not museum things, but they are things that can actually make us make better money, if that's what we want, or grow our economies, etc., etc. So that's my kind of contribution there.
Thank you so very much. And I see where we've also on the points that you talked about, we've had some discussion in the chat concerning that as well. One thing someone just mentioned is that that more people should be awake to the possibilities of African language. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And one thing that a gap that we definitely have seen in the community is that in the wiki community is that there are some languages that, especially in Africa and its greater diaspora as well, that are lacking in Wikipedia. For example, at Africa, we've had events on Yoruba. We recently worked with groups from the Hausa community as well on a different collaboration. And can you briefly just describe, I know that you've worked a lot with the Zulu language. We've connected with the Wikimedia South Africa community. What is a way that you feel, for example, we have events called translate-a-thons where we'll find information that may be in one language but not available in another language. So, for example, it might be available in, let's just say, in German, for example, but it's not in Swahili or in Zulu or other languages like that. From your perspective, what does that do when that information gap is missing? Because we have a lot of information that may fall through the gap. Something may be in one language but not in another. So information that may be available to one community may not be available to another because of language. So as someone who studies language, what is the what is the importance of that connection for you, especially since you mentioned sending students over to learn directly in the communities and coming back with that knowledge? What's the importance of that transfer to you?
Oh, awesome. Yeah, as someone who kind of was interested in, who studies dissemination of the Zulu language and its growth, when people, when something is in English, only 10% of South Africans, for example, speak English at home. This may be shocking to many of you, and when you come to South Africa, all those who've been in South Africa, you'll know, South Africans, including myself, who we don't speak English perfectly. And so what that leads to, it affects many other things, including like reading for pleasure. People may not do that as much. So it may affect then the level to which people are able to engage with written things, or like as far as, especially things that are based on volunteering. Africans are they tend to be, sorry to be generalistic, quite touchy about this, and it's sensitive because English is linked to economics. So no one wants to say, I don't speak English very well or Portuguese, because it may mean that you didn't last long in school or you were not good in school. So there's all these socio-economic implications that are not good. So people are quite always eager to just go for English, even when they don't speak it quite well. And in the Zulu aspect is that, well, when it's in English and not Zulu, our mothers, our fathers in the rural areas, it's a blackout. So, for example, let's just take one word: global warming. What is global warming in Yoruba? What is it in Zulu? Until it's in Yoruba and Zulu, it doesn't exist to someone who speaks Zulu and understands Zulu, only Zulu, and is comfortable with Zulu. So you see the implications of this. You can extrapolate it to all sorts of other things that affect Africans' real lives, but they're affected by access to language.
So if that space exists, right, when you go to a platform like Wikipedia, for example, or just if you go to if you're looking for something, so for information on something, let's say you look something up on let's say a Google or something like that, most of the time it will come to a Wikipedia article, if not in the first few hits, it'll be on the first page at least. So if you're looking for something and you see it in your language, right? What from what you're saying, if that's the language that you speak, if that's the language that you're most comfortable with, it's probably going to have a greater impact than, for example, the more generalized colonial, especially languages that are used in that context. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. And I think Dr. Johnson, who has longer experience researching in South Africa, can actually have more input than me, because I know she has experience in Xhosa, which is another language of South Africa. Like I'm sure the people you're talking to, I don't know, Dr. Johnson, did you have to kind of translate a lot of things or what? Because I think that might answer this question better.
Dr. Johnson? And also, I did want to. I see that we're coming really close to time. It's amazing how quickly conversations like this can continue. But I wanted you to touch on Dr. Johnson, but also a great opportunity for those watching and listening. That's happening in the coming weeks, actually, at the Center for African Studies, which is co-hosting a conference on digital learning next week. And then I want to touch one more time on our event that's going to be happening in December as well, for those of you who are interested in joining. And we'd like to interplay this use of language as well as training in editing and working with partners to help students who will be joining us to learn not only how to use information like this and edit Wikipedia on Africa, because it's going to be focused on African history and knowledge and so forth, but also other opportunities like this as well. Dr. Johnson?
Well, I don't have much to add there without going off into a different tangent. And I know we only have like maybe 10 minutes left. So I'm really interested to hear about the students, because I'm afraid I might take us off on a different tangent there. And I wanted to hear the students and get some, if there's any questions from the audience. So I'll defer.
Fantastic. But really briefly, there is an opportunity coming up, and I did want you to mention that, if you could, concerning the
conference that we're having.
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yes. Well, so, and I did put the link to our website in the chat there. So it's the Department of African Studies, actually, at Howard, is co-hosting, actually, with Bowie State and some other local HBCUs, a conference on digital learning in Africa in the post-COVID era. So it's an international conference. We have many speakers from the African continent, from various African countries, and it's kind of well, the panels are varied. So we have some very high level panels listening to policymakers and those who may be more in positions of decision making, but then also some, kind of more grassroots panelists, because as you can see, it's people like Piwa and whatnot who are really, I think, going to give us some really, I think, innovative ideas in terms of how we actually really move our agenda forward. So that's taking place. Actually, it begins on Monday, and then the link and everything is available there on our website. And we have actually a whole schedule of our events. So that's why I just posted the main website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that we've been able to have this conversation and so forth. Let's take a look and see some of the activity happening in the chat and some of the questions that have been asked. And the link to our December 10th event is also in the chat, but you can connect by going to bit.ly/AfroCrowd. That's Afro and Crowd, HBCU Africa. And you can sign up there. And we're also going to be adding more information about everything mentioned here today at AfroCrowd IT on Twitter, as well as afrocrowd.org, where you can get all that information. We were hoping to have some students joining us, so which is why we moved the conversation around a little bit to accommodate for that. Who I think some of them are in the chat. They had a hard time getting through.
How are we doing on time
today? We're doing. We have maybe 3 more minutes left.
Okay.
So I wanted just quickly, Daquan, if you want to take a look at some of the questions and hopefully we can touch on those before we move around.
I apologize in advance for just jumping ahead, but is it possible to provide the platform for Chinedu Nwokofor to speak? He's a member of Smooth. He's also a descendant of Nigeria, HBCU alumni from Morgan, and he's on the call right now. So I would love it if he could have the opportunity to speak. And I tried to answer some of the questions in the chat, so I can do that while he speaks.
Okay, sure. Please go ahead, Gina. Is he calling in through?
He raised his hand. I don't know if we could hear him, but he's again, he's an attendant. If there's any way for his audio to be activated. If not, okay, here we go.
All right.
Well, Chinedu, you have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can, and we can see you.
Fantastic. I'll make this very quick. I really appreciate what everybody has said, especially what the gentleman said about kind of making language sexy. I think I see that now when you look at, for example, I'll make this very brief. When you look at media, Netflix has a very famous show now called Blood and Water. It's based in South Africa. And in that show, it's showing, a typical show that you would see in America, but then the language, they're traversing through 3 or 4 different languages that are spoken in South Africa. And I think that is the pivot towards the sexiness, if you will, of our languages. But I just wanted to put an emphasis on how the diaspora and those back home, how we could, bridge that gap. I think it's time to move from the idea of Africa just being idealistic in a tourist sense, where it's like, oh, you go to Africa, you go to the slave dungeons in Ghana, and then you come back and then you say that you've done that, you've taken a picture, but actually kind of find a way to make it of interest. And I think that starts with the kind of the cross-pollinization, educating younger kids, from high school, so on and so forth. And I think that just plays into what, the 2 speakers said today. I just wanted to put that point out there, and I thank you all for the time.
Thank you so much for coming. We were hoping to have, I think, 4 more folks coming in through, and they had a hard time getting in through the platform. But what I wanted to emphasize is that this is just the beginning of that conversation. And so we are going to continue on. Chinedu, thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to continue that conversation as well in the conference. So if you're interested in continuing with on here, I'm going to be sitting in the lounge. You'll see me at table number 4, and we can just continue the conversation there. Throughout the conference as well, it would be great to continue to hear from y'all who have connected with us about some of the themes that have been brought up, working with HBCUs and also potentially other universities in connection with this project. I'm putting up once again the link to sign up with us. Yes. And also, you can also contact us at afrocrowd.org, and it's afrocrowd.org/contact to join us as well. And once again, thank you so much, everyone who connected with us. And I hope that we'll be able to continue hearing from you some more. I see that we're still on. So if it's possible that we can still keep talking until they shut us down.
Well, and I was going to say, I don't see Hausa on the dashboard. Faisal, so good. Then that's an opportunity for you to come in.
Yes.
That's how we should think about these things now. You know, when there's space, that means you come in. And on Chinedu, what an excellent intervention, because I wouldn't have done. I did an app in Zulu, the first app by a native speaker of the Zulu language, etc., etc. I wouldn't have done 80% of what I've done in South Africa. So America is a very important space in the diaspora. Africans don't like hearing about this, but Americans are not afraid of new ideas, whether they believe it or not. So they may not believe what you're doing. They just, okay, buddy, whatever, just keep going, whatever, you know, but you just get done. And they encourage new ideas. In other words, there's an ecosystem of new ideas in America that is supported organically without the government, etc., etc. And so this is important to Chinedu's point, because this ecosystem is very pivotal in meeting halfway what may sometimes be a constrictive environment. In South Africa, someone would have told me, that's a rule, you can't do that, don't put it this way, don't do that, linguistics says this, don't do that. And it can be quite static, I won't lie, you know. And so hence a bigger platform, reason for collaboration, like Chinedu was saying. Chinedu.
Yes, that's a very good point. It looks like we have been extended a few more minutes. So, Chinedu, if you want to continue, if you want to respond to what Dr. Minyandu just mentioned, it would be great to have you again.
And we're back.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's so you know, I was born here, but my parents are I'm Nigerian. Okay, both my parents are from, you know, Nigeria, and I have been back so many times, and I speak the language, and I feel like, you know, to the point that the speaker just said about, you know, the opportunity. There is so much opportunity here, and there is a huge interest, and I just think, you know, I know that as people who care about the continent, it's about this is how I say it, how do I not sell the continent, but how do I make somebody buy into what they are, you know, get interested. When I was in college, for example, what I did is I started just giving all of my friends Igbo names, and I would tell them, so I'm Igbo, I would tell them the meaning, and they would hold on to it. And yes. I think that's a sense of ownership. And when I think about, when you look at, for example, how China has been able to move forward, think about when Chinese people come to America, one of the first things a lot of them do in that switch is get an English name. When Chinese students are taught English, even as young as elementary school, they take on names like John and Mary, because that sends a sense of ownership to being of that culture. So I think even little slight things like that have such a beautiful thing. I mean, Shakespeare did say, what's in a name? It's very, very important when you kind of get that ownership to get us back into a space on where we recognize not only where we're from, but the importance of having meaning to a name.
And that actually comes right full circle with what we're trying to do here, is when you have ownership of the knowledge of your own narrative and story, that ownership and that connection to that history and that story is very important for not only communities, but also for the history in general of that community. So it's very important that people of African descent on both sides of in the diaspora and on the continent work together to continue to building that knowledge and information. So thank you so very much for coming, and thank you as well, Chinedu, for joining us. Thank you, Daquan. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, and thank you, Dr. Minyandu. And for everyone who joined us in the chat and elsewhere, we thank you as well. Please join us at africrowd.org for more information, and follow us at Twitter at AfriCrowdIT for more oncoming events that we've discussed as well. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Great job.
So I think I will just hand the mic over to them to just lead us into the session. So hi, Taz.
Hello, thanks very much, Benedict. Hello, everyone. My name is Taz Elias. I'm the brand collaborations lead. in the brand studio for the Wikimedia Foundation. And I'll be speaking to you about one of the aspects of the brand resolution. So I'll pass it over to my colleague, Matoto.
Thank you, Taz. Hello, everyone. I'm Matoto. I am a brand manager within the brand studio, which is a part of the larger communications department at the foundation. I'm videoing in from Johannesburg in South Africa, and I hope you all are well. Today, we are going to be sharing an update from the brand studio team and the communications department, and sharing two very hopefully interesting to you and very much exciting to us projects that we are exploring as a team for communities around the world. So to give some, sorry, Benedict, just if you have any housekeeping you'd like to share about Q&As, and we are happy to spend a little time on the slides and give some time at the end of the presentation to have a discussion and a conversation about what we've shared. I'll also be looking at the chat to see if any questions come along as we go through the deck. Thank you. Okay, so on the second slide, thank you, Taz. So one of the big, in the last 2 weeks, in fact, the foundation has announced, and I'll link into the chat now, an announcement for the board about the next steps around of the movement brand project. So it's just over a year since the movement brand project was paused to engage the community following the publishing of the color letter, which is mentioned on the movement brand project page. It was a letter by the community sharing their thoughts and comment about how the renaming of the foundation in particular should be managed going forward. A ad hoc committee from the board was formed, chaired by Shani Everstein, who convened members of the community, including 9 community advisors, who have spent just under a year in conversation and dialogue to understand how branding can be executed better, what can be done about the renaming of the foundation, and how we can include more consultative and participatory processes in the way that branding is done in the future. And so what was resolved by the board following this very long and very, very powerful moment for the foundation, coming with representatives from around the world in the community, was a set of resolutions that are captured on Meta. Some context can be found in the resolutions, and you feel free to read them in detail. Today, what we'd like to share are 2 of the 4 projects that have been given the go-ahead and the green light to be explored by our team and shared with the community in the next 12 to 18 months. And so the 4 big projects coming from this resolution are that, or primarily that, there will be no renaming of the foundation and in the period of this financial year, and any new explorations around naming will begin afresh and with consultation through a participatory process with the community. That's a big one. And the 4 that follow are very important because they allow us to do to look at brand beyond naming and see what brand can do in advancing the work that communities are doing on the ground every day around the world. The first is around flexible naming for affiliates. So relooking what opportunities affiliates have in renaming. Those who want to change can, and reviewing some of the guidelines therein. The second we'll discuss today is around the development of a sound logo. The third is the updating of our brand guidelines. And if anybody on this video call has ever tried to find the correct logo of some said project, it may be difficult to find the most up-to-date. And so as part of our work as a brand studio is to update this and make sure that not just that the right resources are available, relevant resources are available, and they're easily accessible on Meta and in one place. And the last project is a pilot where we will work together with a single community to resolve their specific needs. For example, if the Igbo community wants to relook their social media presence on all their channels and develop a series of campaigns in the next 12 months, this pilot might resolve and help them resolve some of the brand design communication challenges therein. And so those are the 4 big things that we're excited to begin and talk about. Taz will now share a little bit about the sound logo, and then I'll share a little bit about the brand guidelines.
Thanks very much, Matoto. So once again, hello, my name's Taz. So I'll be looking at exploring the idea of creating a sound logo, which will primarily be used to improve identification of Wikimedia content on audio interfaces. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail about that now. So firstly, what is a sound logo? Sound logo is essentially a short sound recording that communicates a message or identity about a company or organization. So in the context of what we'll be exploring as part of this project, it's unlikely to be any more than maybe 1 second long. It won't have any words or any dialogue in the context that we'll be working with it. And it will be used to identify Wikimedia content, as I've mentioned. So right now I'm going to play some examples of sound logos that you're likely to have heard before, hopefully. And if not, we'll be able to explain a bit more about them. Feel free to add any comments in the chat or any questions as well. Hopefully you'll be able to hear these. So that first one was the Nokia sound logo, which came to prominence in the 90s, I think, in the late 90s and in the early noughties as well. So that was Nokia's sound logo. We'll move on to the next one now. And the next one is Netflix's sound logo. Play that one for you again. And then lastly, we'll play what is very likely to be the most popular sound logo, I think, around the world, which is a sound logo from Intel. So just to delve a bit more into what a sound logo will do in the context of the project that we're working in, it's going to help people recognize Wikimedia content on audio interfaces. So as it stands, Wikimedia content is used quite often in spaces where our content is heard rather than read. For example, during a voice search that's made using a voice assistant like Siri or Alexa or the Google Assistant, a lot of our content is served to users through smart speakers or mobile devices. So we would like to use the sound logo to identify every time our content is used via these avenues. The sound logo that we will hopefully be able to uncover using as part of this project will become a part of our sonic identity in a similar way that our registered marks, so the puzzle globe, the Wikipedia word mark, so in the same way that those logos are a part of our visual identity. As it stands, during the phase 1, which is the planning of the sound logo project, the sound logo will cover all of the Wikimedia projects in all available languages where content is served in an audio setting. So across each language that a smart speaker or a voice assistant in various languages uses our content, the same sound logo will be used. We essentially see this project and the resulting sound logo as a creative branding innovation, and we hope that this will allow us to co-create a sound of free knowledge with the Wikimedia community. So I'll play this video for you. So that video there is a part of some brand communications that the foundation has used. So this is an opportunity to use a sound logo, you know, at the beginning, during, or at the end. A sound logo could also be used in a host of other areas, including app notifications. So for example, on the Wikipedia app or on an app that a third party may use to reuse Wikimedia content. It could also be used as a feedback sound on a user interface, for example, on a computer where Wikipedia content is being reused. It could also be used as part of visual learning media as well. So there is a whole host of use cases that a sound logo could be used for, which we will be researching as part of this project. So as mentioned, all of these speakers that you can see on the screen right now, those are the smart speakers that I was speaking about. So just to give you an idea of what they are, from left to right, we have a Harman Kardon speaker. That's the citation speaker, and that uses Google Assistant. Next to that, we have the Google Nest, which also uses the Google Assistant. The two black speakers are first generation Echo. The small one's the Echo Dot, and the large one is the Echo, which features the voice assistant Alexa. And the last sort of grey speaker at the back on the right is the Apple HomePod, which uses Siri. We started to do some research into voice searches, and which are usually used on smart speakers. And currently, 27% of the world's online population uses voice search on their mobile devices. Bit more background as well, in a study by voicebot.ai, which looked at questions asked of voice assistants specifically about brands, between 88 and 97% of correct answers that came through those voice assistants actually came from Wikipedia, which is an incredibly high percentage, which is very positive because that feeds into, you know, our movement-wide objectives. But unfortunately, not all of those correct answers were attributed to Wikipedia. We hope to use the sound logo to respond to such searches through voice assistants, and partner with tech firms around the world that opt in, you know, such as Google, Amazon, Apple, etc., to be able to serve the sound logo that we uncover as part of this project alongside Wikimedia content. So that's about it for the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat, but also we welcome direct feedback, any questions, thoughts and feelings, to an email to the core team, which is myself, Matoto, who's also on this call, and our colleagues Kelsey and Lena, also at the foundation. So please email any feedback to soundlogo, one word, at wikimedia.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I've also dropped the email into the chat. It's easier to copy paste. And now I will spend a little bit of time sharing a little bit about how we are looking at our brand guidelines. Right. So our brand guidelines are a wonderful resource when you are, building a brand and maintaining a brand over time and using it to connect with audiences. There are a set of rules and guidelines that we and any organization essentially puts together to make sure that our trademarks, logos, word marks, even our colors are being used in the best way possible. And they may refer to certain measures about how we use logos, names, colors, and it's meant to ensure that we represent the brand optimally on everything from pull-up posters at a conference to a virtual environment like AirMeet when you're hosting conferences in this post-pandemic world. And so on the next slide, we really want to improve what we have. Oh, sorry, if you go back one. We really want to improve what we have because it's of benefit to the work we do as a communications department, but also a benefit to communities around the world. Currently, there are a number of guidelines that exist that support this work. What we've realized is that there are times when these guidelines are disconnected and perhaps some elements are not available and some have not been updated with the correct material. And so this work is going to allow us to connect all the different guidelines that exist on Meta, make it easy to find the things we need, and also use them accurately guidelines and elements that are available. And it's not just for the movement, it's also for press. So sometimes you'll find that you read an article and you notice that they've used the wrong Commons logo and they've used one from 2010 or prior. And so this work, because it's available on Meta and will be available on Meta, it will be available to for anybody to share with press when they're engaging in their media outreach campaigns. So the guidelines portal will exist on the next slide. The portal will exist on Meta, which is an important thing to say because this is where organizing happens. And we intend for it to be where the brand Meta guideline is currently, but now with an easier to read interface and using the hyperlinks system to be able to link out to places where other guidelines exist. But the starting place for everybody's journey, whether you're creating a new logo or whether you are looking for a Google Slides template, this is the place to find it. And one of the big things we want to do is that once the guideline has been created on the next slide, we intend to host a series of training workshops and sessions where we'll walk through attendees around the world in relevant languages where possible about how the guidelines portal works and in those sessions, hopefully gather some feedback about how it can be improved going forward. And that's an important point to make in that this isn't a once-off job. We are custodians of a living brand, and that changes and responds to the world. And so every quarter, we will relook this portal and find areas where improvements need to be made and updates. And so this dialogue will continue beyond these training sessions, so that we keep this resource useful and helpful to the work that you are doing. And that's what we have for the guidelines. Please, we'd love to hear your feedback, your notes. I will also add my email into the chat. If you have questions about the guidelines and would like to learn more, you're welcome to give us feedback from this presentation, or any thoughts you have and ideas. Thank you. I think, I'm not sure if Benedict is still on the call. But I see we have 15 people in the session. And if there's any part of what we've shared that you'd like to learn more about or have a question about, or want to share an idea, or you have a sound logo idea, please welcome. Yes, Douglas. Hi, Douglas.
I'm not sure if Douglas can
hear us.
Can speak, actually. It says I'm just checking messages. One moment.
Got it.
I think we may have to.
I'm trying to turn on my.
Oh, there you go. Benedict is
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, guys, I was having a bit of a technical issue, and yeah. Okay, I think there are some questions. Okay, let me see. Some people have their hands raised up. Trying to click on it. Okay, Douglas. I'm going to invite Douglas to talk now. So, Douglas, I think he has a question. So, Douglas, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Benedict, and thank you, Marcela. I hope I've mentioned that right. So, sorry I joined a bit late for the session, but I was wondering if
okay, while we're waiting for Douglas,
I was wondering if there are guidelines for how the sound logo can be used for besides the walkthrough that you mentioned. If there are guidelines for how the different Wikimedia affiliates can use this sound logo.
Thanks for your question, Douglas. I hope you can hear me okay. In short, yes, there will be guidelines. They don't exist just yet, but as mentioned, as we have our logos and visual marks, and they're a part of our visual identity, and those aspects of our identity have guidelines and policies that govern the way they can be used by the community and also by third parties. The sound logo itself, yes, there will be guidelines and policies around how the sound logo can be used internally by the community and by third parties. Those guidelines and the policies around them will come a bit further down the line after we've found the sound logo. There'll be some legal aspects as well in terms of registration, protection, and also as part of that process, there will be some guidelines and policies.
Okay, thank you so much. My last, actually, it's a follow-up question, because one of the examples that was given, I saw something on Meta about a sample sound logo, like for example on Nokia, usually on Nokia phones. So I'm wondering if this can connect to use cases for this. Are there any use cases for the sound logo? Probably does the foundation in the future anticipate to go into technology or investments that can make use of the sound logo? Like scenarios of where the sound logo can be used, for example.
Yeah, I would say that the main use cases for the sound, for any sound logo, I think, currently would be essentially, firstly, so feedback from user interfaces. So Matoto and I and our colleagues are investigating a sound logo to be used as part of audio interfaces that serve Wikimedia content as part of voice searches. So that would be the main one that our team are looking at. But there are lots of other use cases and opportunities to use a sound logo. So notifications on apps being one. There are other feedback sounds on user interfaces, whether that be on a laptop as a device, for example. So if you're using a website or a built-in app or piece of software, it could be used there. I think the most common usage, I think, for Matoto and I, because we're part of the brand studio, in terms of us using it in the course of our working day, would be branding on videos, for example. So sort of brand marketing or communications videos as part of the foundation's output to communicate the aspects of our mission or any activity that we're doing. So that would be a very common usage. Other usages, I think, may include, for example, podcasts, because podcasts are really growing in popularity around the world as an alternative to radio, but a fully audio-based format. And then lastly, I think other aspects that I think it could be used would be visual learning media. So that would be sort of multimedia or mixed media educational learning aspects where Wikimedia content is used as the main format of content for learning. So those are just a few of the use cases that we've looked at in the early stages of this project. And I'm sure there are lots more. I would invite everyone on the call, feel free to send any ideas, suggestions, or any questions about use cases to the email that's in the chat, because this is definitely something that we would like to investigate alongside the Wikimedia community to find as many use cases as possible and put them forward and try them out.
Okay,
right.
I think you have a question on the Q&A. The question is, would the brand identity affect other projects in the foundation?
I see the question. So does the flexible naming...
Matoto, I think you talked about it.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Please.
So from Nicholas, we have, does flexible naming mean that affiliates will be able to choose any name which does not contain any Wikimedia official brands like logos and names? At this stage, the flexible naming will still exist within our naming guidelines. it's an extension of what we already have, but it will permit, for example, an affiliate to call themselves, rather than Wikimedia, they may be able to call themselves Wikipedia South Africa. But at this stage, we have not begun that process. So what the rules are of the new flexible naming is yet to be determined, and it will be determined in consultation with affiliates themselves, and looking at the guidelines that exist already. I think as a rule, we don't intend to overhaul anything. We're really about trying to make very small adjustments and improvements that give organizers the ability to achieve their goals. And naming is one of those things. And so at this stage, I don't have a definitive answer for you, but once the project has kicked off, which will have a quite an involved time with consultation, that will be determined collectively.
Okay, thank you, Matutu, for that. I don't know if you answered the question about if there is any brand, if the brand will be affected, if any brand will be affected, if the brand stuff identity affects other projects in the foundation. So I don't know if you answered that question.
Oh, let me see it.
Yeah, somebody was asking, would the brand affect
right.
other projects in the foundation?
So the brand identity will not be changed at all of any project in the movement at this stage. And if what we talked a little bit about was the guidelines, and we are auditing the brand as it exists, and we're highlighting where it is sort of being used in the best way and where there's deviation, and recommending some tactics and ways to use these brand elements in the best way possible. But we're not introducing any new brand elements, logos, graphics, other than useful resources, which will include Google Slides template using the existing design elements, a social media announcement card, some imagery around that, and all of these won't be new additions. They'll be using the elements we already have. So I hope I answer that. It won't affect any project in the sense that anybody will be getting a new brand. All we'll be getting are some clear resources about how to use the elements we do have. What are our colors? Are we center, left, or right in the word mark? And what red is the Wikimedia red, for example?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you've answered that question. Somebody was asking if, I think Jesse was asking, is there some form of mailing list that we can join? Is there a mailing list for this?
There isn't a mailing list at this stage. We want to open a channel and a forum for engaging around these projects. And my colleague Samir, who isn't joining our call, who you may know from previous engagements, will be looking at what channel is the best forum to do so. At this point, it's likely to be a mailing list and or an existing platform like the brand network that exists on Facebook, which has been dormant for some time, but it may be a wonderful community to gather people who are interested about brand communications and want to have a forum to sort of gather and convene and ask questions and ask us. So at this stage, no, but I may have some updates in the next few months.
Okay, I think that's the question we have so far. So, guys, if you have any more questions, please feel free to use the Q&A and just type the question you ask, you want to ask, and then if you would prefer to say your question out loud, please just raise your hand so we can invite you to the stage so you can ask the speakers the question. And yeah, I think that's that's it for now. So, guys, I had a question before myself, but due to my technical issues I was having from my end, I sort of like forgot about the question. Maybe I will circle back to you guys about on the question.
Yes, you can use our email address or the sound logo. What we as a team on the sound logo on there, and we'll be able to answer any questions that come up in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome, awesome. About the training, you mentioned training during your presentation. What sort of training are you going to, when you say for the community, are you just going to pick, for instance, say the key members of each user group? Are you just going to train them and then have them go and train their own people, or do you have like a collective training of training everybody together? Is it like a what's the form of training you have in mind to provide?
The content for that training is specific to the guidelines walkthrough, and so in doing that, it will focus on broadly the brand in the brand universe, the Wikimedia brand universe, and introducing people to different aspects of it and the project brands therein. And then we'll focus very closely on the platform that we've updated, the guidelines on Meta that we've updated, and walking the attendees through what is available to people, and how to use different aspects of the guidelines. And the method of who and how, that is to be determined. My colleague Samir is thinking about that right now and deciding how and what capacity we can do these trainings. We want them to be one of accessible to as many people as possible. So we're looking at languages, we're looking at time zones as a big consideration, so people are able to attend them. We want to make them, and those that cannot attend a live session, that we have a recorded version that people can use as a form of self onboarding. And that people that are joining newly into organizing can access this information long before we've launched the Meta platform. And then, and I guess those are the big considerations that we have about the trainings. And then this is also a forum to gather feedback from those attendees about what future trainings may be relevant through the year. And we can then prioritize the next wave of trainings to tailor to what people are looking to explore. For example, a social media activation, and what resources are available, and how what might start and do that. So I hope that covers it. The first training is just about the guidelines, inclusive in terms of time zone and language, and also a forum to get feedback from everyone about what gaps in learning there exist and how we can support organizers.
Thank you for that, Matato. I want to also remind the participants here to remember you can ask your questions using the Q&A part in the conversation. Just drop your question, and if you feel like saying your question out loud, just raise your hand, and then we'll invite you to the stage. A quick question for Thas. Speaking about the soundtrack, I was wondering, is there already an existing soundtrack as of now that the Wikimedia Foundation is planning to, the movement is planning to use now, or are you guys still working on it? And then if you're still working on it, do you plan on consulting it out to outside, or is it going to be an in-house thing?
So the plan currently, our desire is that we will activate a global competition for anyone within the Wikimedia community and outside of the Wikimedia community to submit a sound that responds to a creative brief that we will put together. And then from there, hopefully, as it stands, as we see it, that will be whittled down to shorter and shorter submissions based on votes from our community and the public as well. So in terms of how that will play out, we will certainly be engaging with the community for feedback on how that contest may work and all of the ins and outs and all of the detail surrounding it. But as it stands, our desire, because a key objective of this project is to co-create the sounds with the Wikimedia community. What we would like to do is to open it up to the community to submit sounds, vote on the sounds, and also have have some input on how it's developed. In terms of there being an existing sound, there isn't currently an official sound that we use. From what I've seen and looking on Commons, I think there was one that was created maybe 11 years ago that wasn't utilized. So feel free to search on Commons for that, to have a listen for that. I'll try and paste that in the chat before we go. But yeah, we think just like several of the project's logos that have been created over the past 20 years that, Wikipedia has been in existence, those logos have been co-created by the community as part of kind of logo design contests. So we would also want the sound logo to follow that suit as well. So as it stands, as I say, sort of in phase 0 of this project, as it stands, as we start to plan and develop how this project will play out over the next 1 to 2 years, we feel the best way to do it would be like previous logo design competitions and open it up to the community and hopefully beyond as well.
Thank you so much, Taz. Thank you for that. So yeah, still reminding our participants that you could ask your questions, you could drop your comments. If you want to ask a question, use the Q&A session. If you want to say your question out loud, just raise your hand so I can invite you to the stage. And yeah, so still on the sound, I think I'm very much interested in hearing what's going to sound, what Wikimedia will sound like. So I'm wondering, is there like a time frame? What's the time frame or the time for actually executing the project or bringing the project to life?
So at the moment, we're still developing the project timeline, but we see this project as taking certainly over a year from now onwards. So in terms of the way that we roll projects out from sort of summer to summer, that's the fiscal year at the foundation. But yeah, we'll take this second half of our fiscal year at the foundation up until June, July on planning and development, and then the rollout will take place as part of this year, but also as part of next year. So I think realistically, this project will take the best part of maybe 1.5 to 2 years. It could take more. Us not having a concrete or solid answer to that is based on the fact that we're inviting community input and sort of conferring with the community to ensure that the project itself happens in the best possible way, but also It's something that we don't want to rush, because this is a new innovation. This is a new sound. It's not actually replacing anything. And this will be the first version of a sound logo. So we think it's important to ensure that we take the time to make sure everyone feels that it's going in the right direction and it's in the right place.
Thank you, Taz, for that. So just want to remind everyone, you can ask these questions now. You can also ask them later. I think Matoto has dropped some links where you can chat them up and ask the questions. If you don't remember your questions, feel free to reach out to them when you do. I think we have about 10 minutes to go for the session. So guys, please throw up your questions now if you have any. And then if you have any comments concerning the rebranding, the soundtrack, please feel free to use the Q&A session as well. So yeah, thank you once more, Taz and Matoto.
Thank you all. I realize we started with 13 people and now they're 23. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Benedict, for facilitating this meeting and this conversation. I've dropped, for those who've just joined, the email for anybody who has an idea, wants to keep in touch about the Sound Logo project, is a musician, if you just email us and give us your ideas, your comments, your feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, Tess, I don't know if it's okay for them to also be able to drop maybe if they have ideas as regards to how they see the competition for the sound track. Oh, okay, awesome. So yeah, guys, you can drop your suggestions on how you think they should conduct the competition in terms of getting the soundtrack, the best soundtrack for the foundation, for the movement, for the Wikimedia movement. Yeah, I think there is a question. Oh, okay. Somebody was just thanking. Yeah, remember to use the Q&A for questions, and then if you just want to chat, use the chat section on there. The chat button is just the first one you see. Just chat. You can use that. The Q&A, just let's strictly use it for questions. Yeah, thank you. I think there's so many people thanking you, Taz and Matoto. So yeah, thank you guys for the work you're doing. Thank you so much. So any questions? Any
Hi, Bashir. I think we lost Benedict, but yes, I can give you a quick summary. Taz and I are from the brand studio at the Wikimedia Foundation, working in the communications department, and we're here just giving a short update about the brand work that we're doing in the next 12 to 18 months. Kicking off with just a short introduction. Our brand work comes off the back of the board meeting that has just passed and the announcement around brand work. So clicking here in the chat section,
and some context around the renaming of the foundation and the decision that has been made, a very positive one. That means that the foundation will not be renamed, and that any work to rename it will not happen without the consultation and participation of the community at large. And that decision allows us to do interesting work with brand that we believe is important, that advances the mission and supports communities as they communicate about the work that they do. And so the 4 big projects are around introducing a set of new flexible naming options for affiliates. It includes a pilot with a single community that wants to do some branding work. It includes updating the brand guidelines that need some updating so that they're easily accessible and hold resources for communities to deliver marketing and brand work. And lastly, which is what we spend most of the time talking about, is the development of a sound logo, which is a short tune that is meant to be used to identify Wikimedia content in audio interfaces.
I think we may be ending soon. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone in attendance now and that attended earlier. Thank you so much for your time. And again, if you have any questions regarding the sound logo, please email soundlogo, one word, @wikimedia.org. I'll just paste that again in the chat. And Matoto can share her email as well for questions around all of the brand resolutions collectively.